So music and culture was something that was always a central part of my life, and so I think that was the constant, that was always what I wanted to do. But in the 90s, the idea that you could actually have a career as an independent, kind of political UK hip-hop artist was completely fanciful, ridiculous nonsense. Having seen the music industry firsthand, my sister was on a major record label. I went to the MTV Awards when I was 16 or 17. I went with her to Nelson Mandela's house when I was 17. She performed at the 46664 gig. And so I got to see a lot of the way the industry worked, the way decisions were made, the way it was decided who would and wouldn't get on the radio. And so very early, I kind of decided I wanted to be completely self-sufficient and independent. And it's interesting because 10 years ago, that wasn't really the model. And now, particularly for UK hip-hop, it's become the model. I mean, Skepta and JME have just sold out Brixton Academy in 3 hours. They don't have a major record label. So I try and encourage artists. My friend always says, if you take shortcuts, you get cut short. Oh. And I believe sort of in the long run, actually, if you've got the talent, the independent route, and you've got the tenacity is the route. And I'd very much try to engage young people with thinking in that kind of entrepreneurial mindset, but also being honest about what it takes. We launched a company called the Hip Hop Shakespeare Company in 2009, which was essentially a music theatre production company aimed at exploring hip-hop as a modern art form, but really looking at the suppressed voices within hip-hop, the more articulate voices, and looking at hip-hop as an old tradition, going back through jazz and blues and reggae to griot traditions of Western Africa, and really putting actually Shakespeare back in a proper context from an educational perspective. Shakespeare's been so sanitized, and it's kind of the thing that we use to intimidate young people, when actually what he wrote was popular performance poetry. Over 90% of his audience we know were illiterate. So how is it in a time when pretty much everyone is literate, he's seen as way too difficult to get or to understand? I'm not saying Shakespeare is not challenging, it is, but I think the rhythm, the stories, the gore, to be honest with you, the brutality, all of the aspects that make a good Hollywood film today are there in Shakespeare's plays, but they're not always used as a creative way to teach this thing that we all have to learn. Because if you're a young person and you know someone's trying to patronize you and assume you're not clever enough to get something, you're never going to engage with something. Whereas there is a way to emphasize, as I've said, the rhythm in Shakespeare isn't there by accident. He did that deliberately. The musicality in Shakespeare isn't there by accident. There's 160 songs across his plays. No one sings them anymore when they perform them to young people. I have no idea why. It was only in the 1990s where hip-hop became massively popular on MTV, and all the materialism and the misogyny and all of that became the major part of what we saw. There was another vision of hip-hop for me, because I was in that. And so very early, I always wanted to try and figure a way to use hip-hop as a force for education. Maybe it's hatred I spew, maybe it's food for the spirit. Maybe it's hatred I spew, maybe it's food for the spirit. If you think that's a hip-hop quote, raise your hand, please. If you think that's a Shakespeare quote, raise your hand, please. Everyone's got a vote, by the way. This is a participatory democracy. So about 90% Shakespeare. Good guess, it's Eminem. From a song he did with Jay-Z called Renegade. One of the things that's never really explained to young people, I believe anyway, in drama and English, but particularly in drama, is that you're not doing drama because we necessarily want to make you an actor. But if you're going to be an engineer or an architect, at some point you're probably going to have to stand up in front of your firm, if you've got any degree of success, and convince people that your ideas are good. If you do it like this, and you mumble, you look at the floor because you're not confident, it doesn't matter how good your designs are, how good your ideas are, no one cares. And actually, if your ideas are pretty average, but you talk like you're somebody, people are probably going to believe you. A lot of the issues in education and in a multicultural city like this is that if you don't have a sense, and this goes along lines of class and race and gender, of why we don't have as many women in science as countries that we consider much less progressive when it comes to gender, like India or Iran, is probably because we don't have many of the same role models. If anyone saw the Indian mission to Mars, almost half the scientists were women. For all the problems that India has with gender, that's a really fascinating situation. So I think that if you don't see your reflection in a particular subject or see someone you can relate to, it's hard for you to engage. I see that the teaching of history and the teaching of science and the way in which we approach these subjects can be a very useful tool for getting the widest possible base of young people engaged in education.